Hello, everyone, and welcome to the virtual opening of the 2021 Studio Art Senior Capstone Exhibition, Habitual Portraiture and Other Reflections. My name is Tara Gladden, and I am the Director and Curator for the Kohl Gallery at Washington College. Each year, the Art and Art History Department and Kohl Gallery work together to offer studio art majors the professional opportunity to develop a body of work that is presented in a group exhibition in Kohl Gallery. This year-long senior capstone experience includes both critiques with professional visiting artists and ongoing one-on-one mentorship with both studio art faculty and the Kohl Gallery director. It's important to emphasize the layered long-term process of this venture. It could not have been completed without the steady, focused commitment of the students to their individual visions and developing artistic practices, and in turn, the responsive guidance of the instructors. On behalf of the Art and Art History Department and Kohl Gallery, I congratulate this year's graduating studio art majors, Liane Beckley, MacKenzie Brady, and Harrison Ernst, on this significant accomplishment and milestone in your budding artistic careers. A major unifying theme in this year's exhibit is that all three artists identify their work as self-portraiture. Through the exploration of self-portraiture, each artist in their own way interrogates their personal identity through relational layers of the self, family, and others within the theater of domestic space, where if we think about the current moment and the context of quarantine, life has played out day after day for the past year. The resulting exhibition embraces a brave vulnerability as it grapples with universal emotional themes of isolation and connection, independence and interdependence reflected through internal and external realities. I'm very pleased to be introducing tonight's event from Kohl Gallery, where this year's exhibit is currently installed. And I'd like to take a moment to offer a brief gallery tour of the work on display before we move on to the highlight of tonight's event, interviews with the artists. This installation by Liane Beckley includes a photo triptych, which presents a visual and emotional interpretation of how things look after you've cried. Also by Beckley is a video installation that explores self-portraiture as short films of everyday repetitive actions that are performed by Beckley, but are inspired by her connection with and the influence of select close family members. MacKenzie Brady's installation includes archival photos of her and her siblings, a self-portrait painted from an image taken by someone else, and an installation that emulates a living room scene, which includes a recliner and a tube TV playing a credit reel of her life up until now. Harrison Ernst presents an installation of paintings, notes, experiments, personal furniture, and objects that he also describes as a self-portrait and visual journal that represents his life over the past year and a half. Now that you have an idea of the scale of the works and how each artist has presented their work in the gallery, I'd like to transition to tonight's main event, our short individual interviews with each artist about their practice and their process.
My name is Liane Beckley, and I'm originally from Upper Marlboro, Maryland. I transferred to Washington College in my junior year from College of Southern Maryland, where I studied art and English as well. I am a major in art and art history with concentration in studio art, and I'm double minoring in journalism, editing and publishing, and arts management and entrepreneurship.
Well, thanks for that introduction, Liane. I would love to hear more about the work that you are showing in this year's SCE exhibit.
So my work in the exhibit is self-portraiture work. I have two different series within that. The first series, which I will share images of, is called How Things Look After You've Cried. And this is a photography series that I did through taking stills of videos. The original was taken through reflections of a television screen. And I was interested in the way that the images were distorted and blurred, and it looked similar to how the world looks after you've cried, and that's how this series came about. And it's presented in a triptych.
Nice. I actually have a question about that series. I'm trying to wrap my head around what the process was, and I want to make sure I'm understanding what you just explained. Those are video stills that you had printed as photographs.
Yes.
But tell me what the process was again. Did you take the video on a TV screen?
So the photos that I just showed were not taken through a reflection. The inspiration behind those photographs were taken in a reflection. And so I was interested in mimicking the visual effect of those reflections without using a reflective surface that would show the camera in the image.
Tell us a little bit about the other piece that you're showing.
Yes. So the other series, it's comprised of 6 videos. Each are titled Self-Portrait or Self-Portrait as, and then a certain family member of mine. And in each video, I perform an action that either that family member performs primarily or myself, or that we both perform. And so the purpose of those videos is looking at if I copied those actions from that person, or if we both just happen to have that inherent desire to perform those actions. And I will share a clip of them.
Yeah, it'd be great if we could see a video. So what is that video titled?
That video is Self-Portrait as My Grandfather.
The idea of identity and self-portraiture and exploring yourself through these different mediums and through these different pieces, how do you how are you thinking about that aspect of the work in terms of, I think, just personally, yourself, the idea of looking at yourself through other people, that layer of, or seeing yourself in other people.
Mm-hmm.
What about that?
I think that one of my biggest goals in the self-portraits was to just be aware of how other people have influenced me so much, and how for the Still series, how events have influenced me a lot. But at the same time, I was also really interested in playing with when things are discerned as a self-portrait or when they're not. I'm really interested in Adrian Piper's work, and I think so many of her works are playing with that idea of self-portraiture and calling out people who impose self-portraiture on works that aren't at all. And so I was thinking a lot about that when I was making these works, kind of on the flip side of how she was viewing them and seeing just how far you can go with the self-portrait.
My next question has to do with the idea of performance and what that you know, I feel like there's a performative aspect to your work, and I was just curious if you're thinking about the work in that way, if the genre of performance art is an influence, or if you even think of your role in the works as performative.
Mhm. I'm certainly influenced by a lot of performance art. I never actually envisioned myself doing any performance art, but I feel that this work definitely goes in that category, as well as self-portrait category and video category. And in a lot of ways, I even feel like there's a lot of influence from still lives, the way that they're composed. Um, but in the same vein, the actions don't feel unnatural in any way. They don't feel like I'm fabricating a story. They just feel like a representation of something that's already happened.
You have also chosen to include a script that goes along with each video. It seems like you're very interested in film and conceptualizing these actions as film. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yes. So the main purpose of the scripts was to invoke the idea of the person performing the actions not knowing where the desire comes from, if it's coming from the person performing those actions or an outside source. So in the way that an actor, when playing a role, is sometimes confused on whether the portrayal is coming from themselves or the character or from the director's actions. So that's the main idea behind the script, is to invoke that questioning of where it's really coming from, the idea to do these things.
Have you always been working with these with self-portraiture, or is that something that just kind of bubbled up? I mean, I've been thinking about, and in my introduction to the exhibit, you know, I referenced the quarantine and how many of us have spent so much time alone or so much time in close quarters with family members, you know, and these ideas of playing with both isolation, feeling very isolated, but also maybe feeling the opposite, like not having enough space at the same time. And I wonder, you know, did just the experience of quarantine influence the direction or any of the directions you decided to take over the course of the past year?
I'm not one that usually does self-portrait work, and so in a way I think I was trying to challenge myself to do something that I in the past am not very comfortable doing. Um, and I could try to say that no, quarantine didn't have any influence, but I think trying to determine that would be impossible. I'm sure it had all the influence. I know it certainly influenced, like, for example, taking the stills and not having another person either pose for the images or help me take the images. I had to do all those myself. And I think the videos definitely were highly influenced by being in quarantine, because you have so much time to think about the things that you do every day. Not to say that any of the emotions or actions that happened in either series were new during quarantine, but certainly something that I thought a lot more about while being by myself.
Hi, I'm MacKenzie Brady. I'm a graduating senior. I double majored in English and art with a minor in creative writing. In my time at Washington College, I have served as the editor-in-chief of the student newspaper, The Elm, poetry editor for the student literary and arts magazine, Collegian, managing editor of the student journal of the liberal arts and sciences, Washington College Review. I've been the president of the Writers Union, and believe it or not, I've done some other things here and there as well. And mostly my art has focused on material-wise, painting and photography, but subject matter-wise, it's been a lot about identity and making either myself as in the process of creating it or the viewer in the process of interacting with it kind of consider an identity or a presentation of the self.
Thank you. Thank you for that introduction. I would really like to start by asking you to share some of the work that you're showing in this year's SCE exhibit.
So the first part of my series is looking at self-portrait, or looking at portraiture kind of in a more traditional sense. So I've got these 4 photos of my siblings and I, each when we were 7. I picked 7 for a couple of reasons, but the one that felt most prominent is that 7 is the only age that my siblings and I have been that we are no longer. My youngest sister on the end in the blue shirt is now 8, and I'm the other end. I'm now 22. So we've got kind of looking at the way that portraits are presented, even in a non-gallery sense, like in the home, framed, hanging on a wall in a living room, is what I was kind of, or the themes I was kind of working with for this portion. So kind of in line with my pictures of my siblings and I is this credit reel that I've made, which will be displayed in kind of a living room scene on an old tube TV with a chair, you know, like classic living room setup. And for that one, I was thinking about the way that we present ourselves in a more performative sense. I feel like we're always giving a performance. And so I literally turned my life into a credit reel, into what comes after the movie. I'm included, you know, things about my family, things about kind of personal anecdotes, some sillier things like my favorite color and that kind of stuff. So I've really been thinking about like what it means to kind of create and present the self in different forms and in different settings and spaces, and then what it means to bring all those things together. So I'm gonna let this play for another minute just so you can get a small sense of what it's like. And then the last sort of element of my thesis has been kind of painting this big self-portrait, and that is behind me. And it's really large. You can see all my paints on this side of my windowsill, and I'm showing it to you in this format because it's been a really weird year, and like having to paint in my room has been really strange, and it feels like it's always there and always something that I'm thinking about. So this kind of adds even more so to that sense of like constantly being on display, that I have this painting behind me. So every time I'm in class and I move to the side a little bit, there's my face again. So yeah, that's kind of my intro to my work.
Thanks for sharing that overview of all the work that is in the exhibit. Hearing you talk about it, a lot of different questions come to mind. I actually would love to hear about the credit reel process. What was the process of putting all those credits together that would be 30 minutes of rolling text?
So it's not actually 30 minutes. It is 30 minutes, but it's 4 minutes and 22 seconds all compounded together. So it's like set for a 30-minute block. So it just loops and loops and loops. And in kind of coming up with that idea, I had originally hoped to come up with like a movie's worth of credits, like 2 hours worth of just me. I was thinking about like, what are the kinds of things that make me up in a way that I haven't explored yet, or in a way that can be like boiled down to a name or a number, or like this much of a paragraph of text. And it was really hard, and I had to like really kind of dig deep at times to figure out like what I wanted to talk about, or what I wanted to show, or how I wanted to show it, because not all of them are so straightforward as like title thing, like what is being identified, and then the identified thing is like a name. Like some of them are much longer and much more drawn out. So like in the credit reel, I talk about much more eloquently the other aspects of my thesis as well. And like I give kind of background information on them in ways that is more in depth. And I talk about like the kinds of questions that I was asking myself as I was working on them, the kinds of things that I was interested in beyond just that. But then I also say some like goofy stuff. Like I have all my Twitter, or not all my Twitter handles, I have all of my social media handles in there. I'm just kind of playing back and forth between like this like really heavy like talking about, I don't know, like naming the people that I've fallen in love with versus like my favorite Gatorade flavor is the blue one. Like this kind of like back and forth between that like really serious, really like personal versus like mundane kind of information.
It makes me think a lot about our current culture right now in terms of social media and how we advertise so much on social media. You know, everything that goes from, yes, the mundane, kind of ridiculous things to more heavy emotional things. And with the credit reel idea, I also feel like, you know, there's this ironic kind of humorous tone to that work. And I'm wondering, you know, in thinking about what is public and what is private and how we put so much of our private life on public display in current culture, you know, were you also thinking philosophically about that credit reel, you know, the idea of how we define self-worth, or how we define what's important about ourselves, or you know, and then there also seems to be like this double entendre attached to the meaning of the word credit, right? Like what, so the credit reel is this form that is attached to film, but at the same time, you know, what are you giving credit to? Can you talk a little bit about those things?
Yeah, so I was definitely thinking, well, I don't want to give myself too much credit. I wasn't thinking about all of those things when I first started this project, because it definitely started as like, it started last year. I like kind of looked over and saw the TV that it'll be displayed on, kind of in a room, and was like, you know what'd be cool is if I like made a credit reel. And it was just like a totally like fleeting thought, like passing moment, like the kind of thing that you just throw in your notes app and move on with the rest of your day. And then I was really thinking about it, and I was like, no, that could actually be really cool to just kind of like think about like who deserves acknowledgement, like, and what deserves acknowledgement in my life, and like how I can play on that. So like the very beginning, you saw like my parents all have their own cards, my siblings, my grandparents, like each of those people have their own like separate card. They get their own separate time. Because like in a regular movie, like those are like the main cast, the main stars, they have the most impact on my life, it feels like, or at least have the most screen time, if we're going to talk about it in terms of like a movie. But then too, there are the like in the role itself, there are like other moments, other things that are in the same vein of like, I named my godparents eventually, but I also like you saw at the beginning, like my political affiliation is in there. These kinds of things that like sometimes we hold to really high regard, like, and sometimes like make our identities around, versus like more mundane, like I'm in a grocery store, oh, there's my favorite Pop-Tart flavor.
I'd love to hear more about the idea of you exploring levels of vulnerability and intimacy, and you know, the idea of you displaying personal moments in the public context of the gallery. I guess what I'm interested in, you know, different people have different comfort levels with how much they display, how much they show of what is personal. So I guess I'm interested in like how it feels to you to work in this way.
It's horrifying. It's so scary. There's this like really kind of addictive, like how far am I willing to push myself? But you get there over time. Like you can't I couldn't have made this work my freshman year. It never would have happened if I hadn't like over time like gradually pushed myself through like revealing information in titles or in really subtle like materials lists or like displaying a thing and saying absolutely nothing about it, just like putting it up there and walking away. Like those kinds of like kind of small like throwing myself out there and not kind of seeing the consequences of it has over time has like given me the ability to like do this much bigger, like much more on display version that I can talk about and not freak out about it.
My name is Harrison Ernst. I'm a Finnish American artist. I was raised up and down the East Coast. I'm graduating with 2 degrees in experimental psychology and studio art. I'm primarily a painter and I use mostly acrylics.
Well, thanks for the introduction. I would love to start by asking you to share some of the work you're showing in the SCE exhibit. Tell us a little bit about your practice and your process.
So this is my installation titled "What Else Do I Have to Give?" It is essentially a self-portrait, kind of a journal of my last year and a half. The language of the journal is essentially the emotional baggage, to put it blatantly, and like the slice of life that was occurring when these paintings were made. And it really sticks with the paintings. A lot of them, like, I can't see anything but the emotional context behind them. And that being said, I don't share them. I kind of make a point to not share the emotional meaning behind them. It can feel super vulnerable, almost like I'm airing out my dirty laundry to share the explicit meaning, and that can be conveyed with the story behind the painting or what inspired it. So I give my viewer kind of everything else, the notes, my plans, sketches, the furniture that's surrounding me while I'm coming up with all of these things, some of the materials I work with, failures, successes, half-completed paintings, because I do understand the irony of putting something in a gallery and saying it's private. So I give as much as I can without having to give that emotional context, because again, it feels really vulnerable. So these are just side views. It's kind of a conglomeration of different materials, techniques, just things I've learned, and everything that has really encompassed 2020 and 2021. These are some of the detail images. You can see the notes that I've shoved in some of the pillows and placed under the palette there.
That's wonderful. Thanks for sharing those images and giving us some information and some background. I have some questions for you. We've talked a lot, I think, about the emotional content. What I found striking is that what we haven't talked a whole lot about is that the installation actually is very much about, it seems to me, process.
Yeah.
And the idea of putting process on display. Can you speak a little bit to that?
My process in general is just kind of like this ever growing, snowballing monster of just trying to keep creating. And I realized that if I'm not going to show the meaning, I definitely should be showing how it goes from the sketch to the completed painting. So much of the process it's just constantly happening. It's kind of how the context gets attached to these paintings. I'm always pushing it to have a project going. And I really just wanted to kind of highlight the process, because I feel like it's an underplayed part in a lot of people's art. You just get the final result. And I've always liked to see the sketches and like the raw components that go into it. So I figured I would share that with my pieces.
The choice to make it a bit environmental, I find interesting also, you know, including the furniture and some of the personal items. And I mean, my question is, did you include those things? Why did you include those things, I guess is my question.
I feel like it helps to understand the concept I'm coming at the viewer with, of just like, there is ingrained meaning behind these paintings, and it definitely helps to see it surrounded by all of the other ingrained pieces. And just like I'm showing clips of my life, I felt like it was only fair to kind of have the setting match the concept, and the furniture really fed into that, of like, this is a slice of my life. This is like a little part of me that I am putting in the gallery on display.
So you've talked a lot about pushing yourself to make and forcing yourself to paint, which is what you say in your artist statement. Yeah. And I'm really interested in where inspiration comes from for you.
I have lists, like laundry lists of concepts that I want to go with. And sometimes the life events that get attached to these paintings, they happen in the middle of a painting, so that will actively impact how a painting is going to go, just as like it's the environment. And the sketches are the other end of that, where I'm in between things, or in between projects when something happens, and that is where I sit down, plan, and it is actively conveying what's happening in my life. But as far as inspiration, just trying to keep it constantly going. I look at everything almost like stories, textures, colors, inside jokes. Sometimes I'll ask a friend for a noun. It's literally anything.
It also seems like you're going into these really deep kind of meditative interior states of mind as you paint. How does that process work for you without being specific about what those things are?
So to use my psychology degree, it is, I get very into the flow state of things, and it can feel very meditative. Sometimes you'll go 3 hours without realizing that, like, oh, I haven't drank anything, or I haven't really moved. I've just been making. And in that time, decisions will get made and parts of the process will change. And it's all a response to the materials, how I'm feeling in the moment. So it can be very meditative. It does just allow you to really, everyone says trust the process, and it's a little cliche at this point, but like, you do just trust the process.
Yeah, I mean, I love what you said about, you know, entering into the flow state. Are there any artists that you find to be particularly inspiring?
It's so hard to answer that, because being raised in the antique malls, so much of the art that stuck with me and resonates with me stylistically, I will never know the name of the person that made it. It's always mystery impressionist #1, or like, it's so hard to really track down the artist and learn from them when I'm seeing it in the mass or a mass that is similar to the one that I have created, where it's just everything is thrown at you at once. So I kind of live in my own little void of looking at the old stuff around me and using that as inspiration.
Yeah, well, I mean, it sounds like the way you conceptualized and structured the installation is also somewhat autobiographical.
Yeah.
In terms of how you have experienced visual art very much in your life. So also trying to recreate a certain kind of context.
Yeah.
That you have experienced, and allow the viewer to experience that same kind of context.
As we've been talking, I kind of realized that I am putting I'm putting the viewer in the shoes of myself as a child, where it's just kind of the context of imagery with no meanings behind it. It's very similar, looking back on it, to like the booths that you would see in these old antique malls, and all the different styles and everything. And even the way that you have to look behind furniture to see some of the paintings. It's all very, I guess, inspired by that.
Thank you for joining us and for supporting the work of this year's graduating studio art majors. Habitual Portraiture and Other Reflections is on display through May 13th, and gallery appointments are available for the Washington College campus community on Tuesdays and Thursdays between the hours of 11 a.m. and 4 p.m. Please email me, Tara Gladden, at tgladden2@washcall.edu to make an appointment. Congratulations once again to Liane, MacKenzie, and Harrison. Good night.